We celebrated Martin Luther King's Day on Monday. This recording is for my fourth and fifth graders only, just fourth and fifth grade for this particular book. Martin's Dream Day by Kitty Kelly. To every child who reads this book, dream big is the dedication from the author. Martin Luther King Jr. was nervous. He had been up all night writing what would become the most famous speech of his life. Now standing at the foot of the Lincoln Memorial, he was about to address 250,000 people. He had never seen that many people gathered in one place before. Men, women, and children were standing row upon row for blocks around him. For 1 full minute, he could not say a word because their applause filled the sky. They were cheering the messenger of their most cherished dreams. Martin Luther King Jr. believed in equality for everyone, not just a few. He wanted all people to have full rights of citizenship. That meant the right to vote, to go to school, and to get a job. In the 1960s, African Americans did not have these basic rights. They could not eat in certain restaurants, go to certain schools, stay in certain hotels, or shop in certain stores. Martin wanted to change all of that, and he dedicated his life to making that change happen. As a minister, he preached that equality was a God-given right, that everyone, blacks and whites, deserved to be treated with the same dignity and respect. He also believed in nonviolence, so he made his demands for equality in a peaceful way. He tried to bring attention to the plight of African American people by leading marches, sit-ins, and boycotts across the South. But his efforts for change were not enough. He knew he needed something more to make his dream come true. He decided to go to Washington, D.C. to talk to the President of the United States about equal rights. "The time has come, Mr. President," Martin wrote to John F. Kennedy, "to let those dawn-like rays of freedom fill the heavens with the noonday sunlight of complete human dignity." Martin made many trips to the White House with other civil rights leaders. They tried to persuade the president to propose a law that would give black people the same rights as white people. After months of meetings and many weeks of telephone calls and telegrams, President Kennedy finally agreed. He too believed in Martin's dreams. President Kennedy addressed the nation on television the night before he sent his civil rights bill to Congress. "We are confronted primarily with a moral issue," he said. "It is as old as the scriptures and is as clear as the American Constitution. If an American, because his skin is dark, cannot eat lunch in a restaurant open to the public, if he cannot send his children to the best public school available, if he cannot vote for the public officials who will represent him, then who among us would be content to have the color of his skin changed to stand in his place?" Sadly, not everyone believed in civil rights. The president's words angered those who did not want equality. Racists reacted with ugly violence. They beat up civil rights workers. They torched churches and bombed schools. They even killed a follower of Martin Luther King Jr. Yet Congress did nothing. But Martin did not give up. He blew the trumpet of hope with stirring speeches. He pumped courage into those who were afraid. He proclaimed his belief in the goodwill of America. He insisted that what he called the Bank of Justice was not bankrupt, that it was full enough to give everyone a golden opportunity. How could Martin show the lawmakers in Congress just how many people in America shared his hope for a better life? He decided that a mass protest march on Washington, D.C. was the best way to make senators and representatives pay attention. Like a general, Martin summoned troops. First, he called upon the major groups who had been fighting long and hard for civil rights, groups like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the Congress of Racial Equality, and the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Then he reached out to churches, synagogues, and mosques because he wanted all religions to be represented. He called up Catholics and Jews, Protestants and Muslims to gather at the foot of the Lincoln Memorial on August 28, 1963. Martin chose the Washington Mall's magnificent white marble statue of Abraham Lincoln as their meeting place because Lincoln, known as the Great Emancipator, had abolished slavery. His Emancipation Proclamation of 1863 had declared freedom for 3.1 million slaves. 100 years later, Martin yearned to free the 19 million descendants of those slaves. People all across the country responded to his call. They made plans to come to Washington or on planes, trains, trucks, trailers, cars, buses, and bicycles. One man even roller skated from Chicago. Movie stars and musicians from Hollywood joined writers, poets, and artists. Parents brought children, teachers brought students, farmers, firemen, policemen, secretaries, doctors, lawyers, plumbers, all came to Washington to tell Congress to pass the law that would give everyone the same rights. In solidarity, people in other countries around the world declared their intention to march on August 28th in places like Berlin, Munich, Amsterdam, London, Oslo, Madrid, The Hague, Tel Aviv, Cairo, Toronto, and Kingston, Jamaica. The march took place on a Wednesday, but people dressed as if for Sunday church. Their purpose was serious, so their clothes were proper. Women wore hats and high heels. Men wore white shirts and ties and fanned themselves with straw snap brims. The month of August steams with humidity in Washington, D.C., but the heat did not stop hundreds of thousands of people from coming to the march. It was the largest assembly ever gathered at the feet of Lincoln, and the gathering was joyful. People sat 20 deep around the reflecting pool where they dangled their feet in the water. The famous singer, Marian Anderson, was supposed to open the program with the Star-Spangled Banner, but she could not make her way through the crush of people. So Camilla Williams, the first Black woman to have a role with the New York City Opera, sang it instead. Soon soaring music turned the mall into an open-air cathedral and filled the skies with song. After an afternoon of powerful speeches and solemn singing, the most magnificent moment of the day came at the end of the program when Martin Luther King Jr. appeared on stage. Applause rolled across the mall like claps of thunder as the 34-year-old preacher walked to the microphone. Women waved lace hankies and men stomped and cheered. Everyone expected something spectacular from this man, the most exciting speaker of his time. They had traveled 275,000 miles that year and given 350 speeches, trying to make America understand the desperation of its Black citizens. But this audience was his biggest ever. His message would resound for years to come. Martin began by addressing the long struggle, the terrible nights of jail and injustice. He talked about the trials and tragedies African Americans had endured. But he did not dwell on those wrongs. Instead, he urged his people not to be bitter, not to hate, not to seek revenge. Inspired by his words, the crowd roared its admiration. They fell quiet only when he paused for a moment. In that moment, Mahalia Jackson, a famous gospel singer, shouted, "Tell them about the dream, Martin, the dream." That's when Martin Luther King Jr. put aside his prepared speech like a bird bursting from its cage. He took flight. Oh, Mrs. Chandler's almost getting teary-eyed. "I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." For the next 15 minutes, Martin dazzled the crowd with his dream of brotherhood and equality. He encouraged everyone to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. Hope pushed Martin's forward, the hope for a better life. He shared his vision for a nation that would no longer be divided, but would embrace all its citizens without regard for the color of their skin. The crowd was spellbound as Martin's voice rose to the sky, full of that hope. He told America that if it was to become a great nation, it must make the dream of freedom come true for every single person in it. He ended with the words of the old spiritual: free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. The next year, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed into law the Civil Rights Act of 1964. A year later, he signed the Rights Act of 1965. Finally, Martin's dream had begun to come true. The end. That was an emotional one. It was a good one. Have a good day.